Wonderful, thank you. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming back into the room and settling down so we can get started. I'm Roger Schoenfeld. I'm Vice President at Ithaca with responsibility for some of our Ithaca S&R programs on the research enterprise, scholarly publishing, and academic libraries, as well as our overall organizational strategy. I'm just so delighted to have a chance to bring this panel to you, which really will bring together some of the different perspectives that we've heard today and kind of bring it together through the lens of what it means for publishers and some of the perspective that publishers are bringing to bear. With several of my colleagues at Ithaca, with support from STM, guidance from Hilke, who I see here in the room, and some others, we'll be publishing a report later this month on some of these questions about how publishers are engaging with generative AI, suggesting a couple of different scenarios to bear in mind. One that some people have talked about already today might bring substantial efficiency gains, but another in which there could be quite a more of a transformational wave of change, and we're all grappling through what does this all mean for us strategically in the long run, but also quite practically. So now we turn to our panel looking at strategy and readiness, really, readiness for AI. Readiness can include things like expertise, right? Do you have the right expertise on your team? Do you have the right systems, the right licensing? What are some of the products you're building, or outbound licensing you're conducting? All sorts of different kinds of questions that many of you are grappling with. Many of us here today are grappling with in one way or another. So here we have a great panel of publishers representing a breadth of organizational types and perspectives. I'll just offer brief introductions. We have Stephen Hefner, who is the Managing Director for Publications at IEEE. Miriam Maus, who's the Chief Publishing Officer at IOP Publishing. Priya Madina, who is the Vice President of External Affairs at Taylor & Francis. And then Marie Soulière, who is the Head of Editorial Ethics and Quality Assurance at Frontiers. Welcome, and thank you for joining with me today, and thank you to Rachel Harper for helping to bring us all together here today. So I'd like to get us started really with a question about some of the opportunities and solutions that you all are pursuing inside of your organizations, and some of the things that you think might help to enhance communications within the scientific and scholarly communities. So on this one, we'll start with Priya, please.
Thanks very much. Thanks to the panel before as well, because it's picked up on a lot of the points that I wanted to discuss, but it's kind of given me a baseline for those. So the first opportunity, which I think is a really important one, is the one that Gratian mentioned about the levelling up. So in this new environment of AI, I think it was a really good point that he made, that actually the global north and global south are really on a level playing field here. So I just wanted to acknowledge, agree with that, it's a real opportunity. And I think linked to that is a point I wanted to make about accessibility. So some of the opportunities we're exploring, it's around things like reducing the cost of language improvement, which again, to Gratian's point, can help level up that playing field. But it's also about accessibility of different forms of content. So some of the contents we've seen earlier, so the visual contents, for example, it can really help with a whole new set of users to this content that haven't been able to access it previously. And then Lisa also talked about different uses of content, so summaries and making things a lot easier for people to access. So I think that's another opportunity. And one specific one that falls under the bracket, I think Lisa used the phrase product to info, is something we've been looking at really recently in the company. And actually yesterday we announced a partnership with a company called DataSeer. And it sort of speaks to the point that we already have the information in the company, which is around data policies and open research, but we didn't have before this ability to monitor and track author compliance with that. So, experimenting, as other people have mentioned, you can really sort of improve the current products you have. And then last but not least, I wanted to just obviously mention, as we're all publishers, the integrity of the scholarly record. So as an industry, we're all struggling with making sure that that version of record is constantly safeguarded. And some of the really exciting things we've done as an industry are, for example, using the Cactus paper pal tool or the STM paper mills detection. And that really sort of highlights those fraudulent scripts earlier on. So I think that's another opportunity for us to work together, as a lot of the other panelists have mentioned too.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was very gratified as well from the last panel talking about a couple of things that we are very much interested in, and for the most part, what we've been turning to AI for is the same things that we've been talking about here for a while, which are efficiency gains and optimization of problems that of solutions that we've already been looking at for a while. Some of those have made great strides, particularly in the research integrity side. So we're very pleased about both the partnership that we've been able to have with vendors who can bring technology to bear on that problem, but also internally developing models and algorithms to look at our own corpus to see where we can detect things in real time and intervene in ethics cases before they become a problem that becomes retractions, et cetera, and kind of pollute the scholarly record. But in addition to some of these more, I would actually call them pedestrian use cases that we'll all see advances in things like discovery and curation, et cetera, I'm really interested to see where we can take artificial intelligence to bring it to bear on bigger, previously unsolvable problems. So for example, last year, the IEEE president kind of tasked the organization with addressing climate change broadly. IEEE obviously has represents a number of disciplines that impinge on that problem, and looking at it as a solution, looking for solutions in that area would be a multidisciplinary task. So we have power and energy engineers. We have experts on microwave transmission. We don't really have a whole lot of expertise in public health. We don't have a lot of expertise in agriculture. How could we start to bring together a number of communities using these technologies to translate levels of expertise so that they could speak the same language and bring their each individual expertise to bear on that problem? I think that, Lisa mentioned it a little bit, this idea of making knowledge, or your report, Roger, called it making meaning. I thought that was both excellent terms. But how can we leverage these technologies to make these multidisciplinary teams come together and solve major global societal problems? I think there's a real promise there.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So I'm here to represent the views of small to medium-sized publishers, and by default, we have to be quite selective when we think about which opportunities to pursue in AI, and we also rely quite heavily on working with external partners, particularly in the technology space. So that gives us a sort of a discipline to really think about what are the biggest opportunities and the biggest pain points we should be thinking about. And in the case of IOP Publishing, and in the case of many of your organizations, I imagine, it's the question about how you make peer review faster, more efficient, deliver to high quality standards, and to a high degree of rigor. And that's sort of where we're thinking we want to test out some of the opportunities AI offers. We've made some small steps, starting to experiment a little bit. And we've sort of done a little experiment looking at the power of AI-driven tools to assess manuscripts. And what we're seeing right now is that these tools are quite good at working out what the science is about. They can make a good call on correctness of the paper, of accuracy of the science, but they're not very good at showing significance or making anything that I would describe as editorial judgment. So that small experiment to me kind of confirms what I thought when we started, which is that I think there's opportunity in AI supporting and potentially augmenting what human experts do, but do I see a sort of an AI doing peer review, as some of the previous speakers mentioned? Not really. I think that's what we're working out, is sort of how can we make the best out of the efficiencies that are offered, but not at the expense of rigor and quality.
Hi, everyone. So Frontiers is a larger publisher on that side, and half of the team have been from the start IT developers and developing our own platform. So we had an advantage in that way, where we were already working with AI tools for publishing for at least 10 years, in particular for research integrity. So we are continuing the efforts in particular in that branch, but I think one of the latest new developments with the latest AI models have been in, I would call it, customer relationship management. If we talk about interactions with researchers and making sure it's on the best topic at the best time, helping them peer review, helping them through all of the steps of publishing with AI tools. That's a whole new aspect that we've been implementing now with the new AI models.
So an array of different kinds of opportunities, some similarities for sure. I'm going to ask you now to speak a little bit about, really building on what Marie was just talking about, a little bit about the role of human oversight. So we've heard a lot today about some of the ways in which AIs have so much power, but also are not necessarily the same as a human, in some cases less than, perhaps in other cases more than, but certainly where we're not sure we want to rely on them absolutely. And so, I'd like to ask for a little bit more thinking here about some of the ways that we're interested in ensuring quality or integrity within the scholarly record, some of the ways that keeping a human in the loop might seem significant to you, or where that seems to have its limits, and how accountability ultimately will work in terms of the work that you're all doing, but also the work not only of publishers, but also of scientists and scholars within an environment where, of course, we want to be sure that we're thinking about inclusivity and fairness, and not just process automation. So, Marie, maybe I'll start with you on this one, please.
There's so much happening in that space with AI, and I think this is something, for those who don't know, I'm also an elected council member for the Committee on Publication Ethics. And what was quite interesting was that already in 2021, before ChatGPT was released in 2022, co-published the guidelines for the AI decision-making in publishing, which already at the time was saying that we did not feel like in the world we were in a position in publishing where we could trust AI to be making any kind of decision, any kind of final decision in publishing, not to accept or to reject papers. And I think that has continued to be applicable since there's more now discussions about AI. And the point that AI itself is not an entity, it's not a legal entity, it cannot be held accountable for any writing, any decision that is made. And this is where having humans in the loop is absolutely necessary. We've held a number of conferences on trustworthy AI for the future of publishing. How do you develop tools that can be trustworthy? I'll give one example here of what we did at Frontiers with our AI tools. There's obviously a lot of testing phase, but we released any new checks for research integrity as what we called untrusted. We literally used that word while our specialists and our teams actually use the tool and try it over the course of months, and then they are further improved up to the point where we feel like a human can, at least to a certain extent, trust the output from the AI and then work with it on a regular basis and use it to help in actual decision making. That is always then coming back to the human for a decision.
I totally agree with that. I would say that's the approach we're taking too. I mean, human in the loop is an interesting way to describe it. I think the human is the loop. Still, there is right now, and this is almost certainly bound to change, but right now I feel that the humans are still very much in control and should be. I don't think the tools are quite there yet. And how far we go to sort of towards relying on AI-driven results, I think that deserves some careful consideration. Reputation is really important in our business, and I see some reputational risk of getting it wrong. across the whole spectrum of AI applications that have been discussed here today. So I think in some ways this is all moving very fast, but in other ways I also think maybe we need to just sort of occasionally take a breath and think about how we make sure that all the stakeholders in the ecosystem are well served. And I have to say, I found the discussions today really useful in sort of realizing that, maybe it's time to also consider a bit more what the medium to long-term implications could be if we lean too heavily into the new.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I think a point that I took on very early on from the keynote speaker, from Dr. Bashai, was that actually humans, she said very clearly, humans are different to AI. So it's not necessarily the word human oversight, but it's a different piece we're talking about here. Humans are one thing, AIs are another. So we should look at them as two distinct things. So I think another point that resonated with me as well is, along with the tools, it's the literacy of the tools. So yes, the tools are developing thick and fast, and all our companies are coming up with them, but it's equipping ourselves with the skills and literacy to be able to not only inform ourselves how they're used and adapted, but also the rest of the community. So we've heard a lot from researchers and librarians that people just aren't really aware of how those tools are used. And I read in one of the Scholarly Kitchen articles as well that publishers need to hold themselves accountable first for understanding how they're used before they can ensure that researchers and others can understand them. And the other part I thought was really interesting was on the legal panel, where we were talking a lot about the different acts, the EU AI Act being a case in point. And it struck me that in terms of human oversight, where we can really bring some added value is actually trying to interpret those acts like that the legal panel did for us today, and actually give some guidance as to what that means and what we actually, that hundreds of pages of legislation in a nutshell, what it actually means. People are worried about breaking the rules. It's not all misinformation of AI. It's people who want to do the right thing, but they're just not sure if they are doing the right thing. So if we can interpret that guidance and make those codes of conduct a lot clearer, like COPE have tried to do, I think that's a really also important use of human oversight.
Well, I was very gratified in the last panel that they answered those questions the way they did. Is that can ChatGPT be an author? No. The answer is no. The other question was whether it has a role in peer review, and the answer was yes there. I think the more interesting part of that answer is the nuanced part. What part could it take place in peer review? And my fellow panelists have answered that pretty well. That I agree with Miriam that it's not just that the human has to be in the loop, the human is the loop. Science is an empirical human endeavor. It's about observation, it's about insight, it's about experiential understanding of the world. Nobody has convinced me yet that ChatGPT has an experiential observation to make about the world. So I think that's a big thing. But the point I was going to actually bring up in this context was I think we should be careful about applying these technologies to solve or paper over problems that are really more fundamental to the endeavor. So we want to apply it to peer review because we want to make it more efficient, because we are flooded with papers. We look at the IEEE, we have 500,000 papers submitted to us a year, and we're going to reject 80% of them, or 70% of them. Do we really need to put a machine in there just to make it more efficient for ourselves, or should we really be trying as a community to address why am I getting 400,000 papers that are just no good? So I'd really like us to see us try to solve that problem rather than solve it through machines just cranking through the efficiency and producing nothing more than just rejected papers.
There's some very interesting questions embedded in that. We're going to. I want to ask now about the licensing and some of the ethics side of things. We at Ithaca SNR, we just published a small tracker of some of the licensing work that publishers are doing. The emerging market for AI content licensing is quite nascent, but developing quite quickly. We certainly need a variety of different kinds of guardrails in place to make sure that we preserve the integrity of scientific communication. There are responsibilities associated with the stewardship that your organizations have over the scholarly record. In some cases, publishers are thinking those through in quite sophisticated ways, and so I'd really love to hear from you about some of those kinds of topics. And Stephen, we'll start with you, please.
This market is clearly in its infancy, right? We're making policy, we're prioritizing our role as guardians of the scholarly record. We are worried about misuses of our information when it's presented in a different format or mixed together in different ways. We're concerned about our position with licensing. What do the licenses mean? Untested, no case law around half of the licenses that we're talking about or their uses in these machines. That said, we are cautiously optimistic that this is an opportunity for us. Our thinking has evolved over the last year and a half on whether or not this was a fundamental threat to our core commercial position or a fundamental threat to our mission to help these machines speak our language. I think we have come around to think that it is an opportunity in both areas and not a threat in either. We think that if the certain guardrails are in place, if we can guarantee things like the provenance of the material is preserved through to the end user, such that we can fulfill our mission of furthering the dialectic of science and making sure that that conversation continues and that we don't break that chain of custody, we will feel very comfortable licensing in a number of environments because we can't fulfill every use case and we can't build every machine. So I think that that's our current position, and we're very hopeful that this market will reward us for that.
Yeah, I mean, it was addressed in a lot of ways this morning with the very interesting discussions about licensing and the legal frameworks. When we were touching upon it earlier between us, we were talking about how even we don't know how CC BY in itself, is that okay to be used directly? Most of the AI ChatGPTs do not provide the source, the citation, so even there's a little infringement probably. In terms of ethical frameworks and guidance, my opinion on this would be just whatever licensing any publisher is going for should try to put a statement in there to enforce transparency on the side of the tech companies using the content, that there is this attribution. This was mentioned earlier, there's a lot of grumbling right now from authors as well, seeing the licensing deals and feeling a bit ruffled by this. But if they were to get the proper attribution, they would be a lot less ruffled by the situation. So in terms of ensuring this transparency, you ensure the transparency, the attribution is there, and this is also the only way I can see of enforcing any ethical or legal framework. It was mentioned as well this morning where if you want to be able to enforce anything, you need to have oversight over what is even, how the tool are being used, what references are being used. So if you don't have that transparency over the content, there will, in any case, not be any kind of way that we can enforce this afterwards.
Other perspectives on this topic?
I was just going to observe that I thought that this is a really complicated area, clearly. And when we were sort of had our pre-panel chat, we all agreed that this was quite complicated and knotty. But I thought we had a really quite powerful call to arms in the keynote this morning. Because what I heard was that, yes, opportunity is there, but ask questions and make sure it's not just about legal implications, but there are also ethical ones and the societal impact implications. So I mean, what I've learned from that talk was just to be clear about what it is we're actually licensing. The challenge we have is that when CC BY was invented, nobody was actively thinking about generative AI. So we don't really know what authors think about their rights and obligations when they sign any license. So I think the sort of the ask questions, don't take anything for read is probably the most powerful point of feedback I had from today.
Just wanted to pick up on a point that Marie made just about the transparency. I think just going back to the view of the authors here, we've tried to make it really clear in any partnerships we've entered into that we want the LLMs to be trained on trusted content, and hopefully that's something that the authors would agree with. But we also really recognise the point about citations and author rights being really important. So that's something we're really aware of, that listening to what's important to them when actually going into any agreements.
I really appreciate this strong sense of sort of not just the commercial but also the ethical obligations in these practices. I'll ask for questions in just a moment from our colleagues here, so get your questions ready. But just want to share that I just heard from a publisher who was telling me that as long as you couldn't see a direct quote from their work come back through an LLM, they didn't have any worries about provenance. And I thought that was so striking as a very different point of view to the ones that I think all of you have shared. And so I just want to acknowledge that as uniform as our panel is, there are other points of view out there as well. And I think it's quite interesting to consider, like, the ethical considerations, as you were saying, Priya, both to the authors as well as to one's own commercial and reputational interests. Were you going to jump in?
A comment on that. I think that we are concerned about both. We are primarily concerned about the mission and the reason we're producing science. The commercial aspects are a secondary concern to the IEEE. We care about making sure that we're doing this for a reason. We're not doing it to entertain people. We're not doing it for clickbait, and we're not doing it necessarily for the money. But you know, I think that's where we take very seriously, as I said, our stewardship of the scholarly record. We want to make sure that people know what the people that are using it for the reason that we intended, which was to build upon it and build human knowledge, advanced technology for the benefit of humanity. That's our top priority.
And I think it sort of goes without saying, but it is worth underscoring the extent to which there is a transformative potential to being able to access high quality, vetted, curated material inside of you know, an array of different kinds of tools. I mean, Lisa and others also have spoken to some of the truly transformative potential here, and I think, you know, which many of the organizations represented in this room certainly see as well. So let's see. Are there questions? I see Robert over here.
Hi, thank you. That was great. Robert Harrington, and I work at Society, American Mathematical Society. So we've got lots of 30,000 mathematicians who are on our case about AI. Mostly negative. They're really worried about privacy, or privacy, as I say back home in Boston. And they're worried about the quality of the content. They're worried about what else our content might be sitting alongside. So if we have peer-reviewed content in a larger LLM, do we really want it there alongside pirated content from an ethical point of view? So what we're thinking about is, can we take something like Llama 3 as a open software and sort of tune that to be a more closed system, perhaps work with some sister societies to populate that, control access, build attribution. Are you guys thinking, and I suppose I'm mostly addressing Miriam and Stephen here, though Priya and Marie could also have their say, but I was just wondering if that sort of more closed idea, I guess it's not truly large languaging model, but is that something you're considering, or is this just off the table for you?
It's not an active conversation, but although it has, of course, crossed our mind. I mean, I'm not enough of an expert on AI to really understand what you need in terms of scale. My understanding is you need a lot. So I think whatever closed system you have, it has to be big enough to actually rival the more commercial models out there. So I think it's a really interesting thought, and for a domain-specific publisher, it's of course something that we debate frequently.
I honestly, where We are not in active development of that kind of a thing ourselves. We are pursuing it in two different ways, though. One is potentially through partners who might be building RAG models and associating with somebody else, or licensing content to individual customers that are, especially corporate customers, that may be large enough to assemble their own group of resources, and they're curating their own collection there. I do understand your concern about context. Like, do we want to be sitting alongside some other thing? But I don't think that we're turning to major public, models to affect any of that. All of it would be bespoke for specific clients or with a partner to do it for a specific use case. But no, that other than the specific client stuff, none of that is a reality for us at the moment. But it's certainly something to consider. Yeah.
So we're looking at small language models at the moment, but we're collecting, as Stephen said as well, kind of research and use cases. So I'd be quite interested to hear more about the one you mentioned, maybe in the break after as well.
Sorry, it's another Englishman, Matthew Salter to Akabana Consulting. I wanted to pick up on a point that that Miriam made or mentioned, that you're not IP publishing and others are not thinking about having peer review in all its sense being done by artificial intelligence. Is that because, or as a general question, do you think even if we had a system which could be near perfect at doing that, that the human element that Stephen mentioned would mean that researchers wouldn't accept something which was so machine done, rather than the concern now, which is more about the fact that the technology just isn't there?
Yeah, I think two answers to that question. So the technology is so far off me ever believing that it would be would be reliable enough. I think there's a lot of opportunity being pushed my way. I look at a lot of options, and this is quite similar to what's going on in the RI space. You know, kind of the promise is there. I haven't seen enough evidence that the rigor can be replicated right now. So that's one thing. So there is a sort of a practical, technical capability issue. But I also think that editorial work, the work our editors do, goes beyond just looking at a manuscript and saying, this is wrong or this is right, and then this is publishable or not. There is an element of curation, an element of judgment, an element of, assessing content in the realm of what has been published so far. And for that, you need to be a kind of a human being with ability to really apply intelligence and not rely on just machine learning.
I think that's a bit, the social part in LZ that we heard about this morning as well. There's obviously this social component. Would we ever accept, as you mentioned, a paper that's been peer reviewed by AI? It would suggest that AI has become a peer, right? So do we feel like AI has reached that level? I think for me, there's three words there. There's rigor, there's expertise, and there's accountability. So making sure the AI would have the right expertise. It would have to be a specific AI trained in the specific field with the specific papers. There's something quite narrowed down with all validated research that would just feed in this one AI that would become the mathematical entity that can peer review all the maths papers, maybe. That could be something to envisage. What AI is being used for peer review right now is mostly for the things that peer reviewers find tedious. The more formatting, is it the right article type? Are the figures the right quality? Are they okay? Detecting that kind of thing. But there is a need for expertise. There is a need for human eye. The Elizabeth Bix of this world demonstrate that on a regular basis. There are things that AI can help with for a lot. It can, what we call, augment human capabilities for a lot of detections, for integrity, for quality. But there is that human knowledge. We talked about knowledge earlier with Lisa, this capacity for knowledge that when you perceive things in a very different way. I can foresee a future where researchers will no longer be writing their own papers and they will all be written by AI, but I cannot foresee a future where we will agree for AI to fully peer review papers. The accountability is not there.
I don't know why everybody hates writing so much. I'm not sure why that became the worst chore in the entire world. But I do think that there are some interesting applications that we heard today. Mark from Mannheim, his idea of applying the machine to do reproducibility experiments on a data set using multiple personas, basically AI personas. Fascinating idea, because I don't think that breaks the human chain. That actually just augments the peer review in a very, very useful way. Another one that we've heard from our volunteers and are working on is this idea of like a logic check, specifically in math-heavy papers, where can you get a machine to validate the proof? So that you get a kind of a second set of eyes there. Not, again, preserving the human element, context, appropriateness, all of those things, but just a few tools that might really make that reviewer's job not just faster, but better in the end. Yeah.
I mean, yes, absolutely, and I can totally see opportunity, but I think I question whether that is really that new. You know, kind of that we've been working on those sort of automated tools for a long time. About 18 months ago, everybody started talking about AI, and then we called automation AI. So I think we have to be clear about what, you know, kind of there's some really good progress being made with sort of helping humans going through what you call the tedious stuff, and I applaud that. But that's not really applying the full heft of generative AI quite yet.
Thanks so much. James Femister, NEJM Group. I was wondering if you could speak to how publishers might think about, is the market fragmenting between kind of model training and RAG-based companies, and does our disposition towards them differ? And when we think about either kind of partnering, licensing, do some have more risks, less risks, et cetera?
I don't work in the AI industry. I don't know if I can answer that question. I mean, I think they're both coming along. I think the RAG-based models hold a lot more promise because they create so much more value for the very specific use case. The general models probably have their business models will have very little to do with what we do. They're extensions of probably going to be extensions of the surveillance and attention economy at some point, and taking on search, generalized search, et cetera. So I think the RAG is where we'd probably want to pay attention to, because that's where we can preserve the missional work of our scientific endeavor. That said, I think the other effect of all of this on our industry is unfortunately probably going to push even further the trend towards consolidation, because the ability to interact and with data science on this level is going to elude smaller society publishers, is going to aggregate around the largest publishers, and probably accelerate, if not just continue, the current trend towards consolidation around scope. And I think that does have something to do with the question you asked.
Thank you very much. Oleg Ruchevsky, prof AI and physicist. You keep talking about this dilemma between humans and AI, and in this dilemma, I invariably see in this conversation and in others that humans are those creatures who are not making mistakes, either conscious or unconscious, don't have biases, and in case of peer review, peer reviewers turn out to be accountable. Can somebody tell me how are we accountable for bad peer reviews in either direction? Rejecting worthy papers or accepting unworthy papers? I mean, who knows a single example where peer reviewer has been punished for any of those? I mean, the worst thing a journal can do to me, if I am not delivering good peer review, not invite me anymore, which to a large extent you can argue is a compliment rather than a punishment. So when we what I'm trying to say, when we discuss the dangers which AI brings, we should think very carefully what is our benchmark. Our benchmark are scientists who are busy, who are not always a good player, who are very opinionated, especially those who consider themselves experts. And maybe we should look at this at AI as much more emotion-free and unbiased player rather than a bad player? Thank you.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this. First, there could be more peer review models like the Frontiers peer review models, where we actually publish the names of all the reviewers with the paper so that they are more accountable for the quality of the peer review that they do and for what they actually did. There are other models, obviously, as well, where you peer review directly online, and therefore you're more accountable for the work that you do as a peer reviewer. That's one part. The second part is there should be more recognitions for researchers for the peer review work that they do, so that also it is taken into account maybe in grant applications or in the review for the universities. A lot of publishers have been pushing for this for years, for the balance of impact, where you get more reward for actually peer reviewing. So that's another aspect. And the third is to address the bias of humans versus bias in AI. I think we had a quite very clear demonstration earlier by our colleague from Portugal, where there is a huge bias in AI because they are trained on biased data as well. It will likely be quite different, or sometimes depending on this topic, it will be similar to the human bias. What I like is using the combination of both, because then you will have human biases and AI biases, and they are likely to be slightly different. So overall, it makes things a little more even and a little less biased.
Bravo to that. I agree. I don't think it's an either or. I think there are challenges to address in how to provide and produce good quality peer review, but the answer is not rely entirely on humans or rely entirely on technology. It's somewhere in the middle, and we're figuring that out. So maybe come back in 10 years and then we'll have that conversation again in a slightly different context.
Well, I think I'm just going to offer one or two closing reflections to wrap us up then. Great questions. Thank you all so much, and terrific discussion. I do think this question about bias and objectivity, if that's the opposite of bias, is actually a very interesting place to end, in the sense that it raises some questions about what the LLMs actually can do for us, and if they are, Stephen, you said, who doesn't love writing, or words to that effect. If they are writing machines, or in your talk, if they're video making machines or podcast making machines or sort of content making machines, then okay, I might be a terrible writer, you might be a wonderful writer. It can help perhaps to level that playing field, perhaps. But maybe the opportunity for us is to think about the expertise that publishers bring to bear and how to separate that from the writing. And I think that that's something that maybe was slightly embedded in James's question. One of the things that we've talked a lot about on this panel is some of the questions about both the discovery side, the kind of output side on the other end of the process, as well as the writing side at the beginning of the process, the editorial review side. It will be very interesting to see in the months and years to come how these tools and technologies can be productized. I think that was an interesting thread that's run its way through as a question our entire day so far, is not just are they cool, not just are they threatening, but what is the opportunity, in fact, to build a product strategy that leverages some of these kinds of technologies? And that's a very, very different question than what does the technology itself do. And with that, thank you to the panel, and I think we're at break, if I understand correctly.